Hello and welcome to the cyber.tap podcast. I'm George, your host.
I'm Jim. I asked the dumb questions so you don't have to.
And today we'll be talking about the national public data breach that happened in August. Headlines were all over the place, and we're going to get into this in a little bit more detail so that you can understand it. And today we have on panel
Joe Beckman.
Joe.
Esteemed guest.
And
not a stranger to the show.
No. Longtime analyst at cyberTAP. How long have you been with cyberTAP?
10 years.
10 years. 2014. Yeah. So.
That was a long time.
It has been a long time. It's going to be another 10 years, right?
Absolutely.
Everyone, you've heard that. Joe's not going anywhere. So national public data. Who are they? What do they do? Why are we talking about them? Why should we care? National public data was a data broker. So
is or was?
Well, there is. Whether or not they will continue to
on
do
hiatus,
business, that will be an interesting thing, right? Data breaches of this magnitude sometimes will shut businesses down, and this was a relatively small company from a head count.
I was clicking around their website and I did get a lot of 404s, so maybe they're in the process of shutting it down. But yeah, speculation.
So what is a data broker, Jim? Do you know?
Well, I mean, by definition, collect data, sell to other people.
Yeah. So data that your data might be disclosed in this breach, but it's not data that you openly gave to NPD. It's data that they've acquired through a number of different ways. They buy it from others. They scrape it from public record. They scrape it from social media.
What's the gray area on scraping it from other breaches? I mean, I would think that companies would do that, maybe not admit it publicly. But Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it seems natural to think that would be wrong,
right?
Wrong, but I'm sure people do it. The thing that struck me about this list was that it seemed to be mostly old data. So to the extent that they're brokering data, they're not brokering new data. Yeah. But anyway, I'm probably jumping ahead. I mean,
but on that to that tune, before the show, we were kind of poking around, seeing what's out there, because there are some resources to look up and find out if your data is contained there. And we were searching family members and whatnot. And from the stuff that hit on my family, it all seemed pretty old. Like there was nothing really from my wife and I, maybe a little bit, but a bulk of it came from my parents and beyond. So it does seem a little outdated. And a lot of the addresses I saw from my people were 20 years, 30 years at least, maybe more. So
yeah, the most recent one I found for myself was a decade old.
And mine was almost 2 decades.
Yeah. And the website, there's a couple out there. I mean, I think we can get to it a little bit more here in a bit, but mpdbreach.com. And then the other one was, George, it was like
npd.pentester.
Yeah, .pentester or pentest.com. Pentester.com. mpd.pentester.com. And these are both, from what it seems like, verified, safe to search. So whatever you input shouldn't be recorded.
Correct.
In theory.
Right.
In theory.
But they're only asking for your first name, last name, and
date of birth or
year
birth
of
year.
Birth.
Yep.
So, I mean, heck, you probably find that already. So
yep,
out there somewhere.
And the other one, NPD breach, you could do first name, last name, zip code, or soc or phone number. So you could, but if any of those hit, it was just showing the thing you searched and everything else was redacted. So you really have to know if you typed in an address, you wouldn't necessarily see a soc. You'd have to hit it to know that it's there. So it's a little bit different than the mpd.pentester.com.
So what was the breach? Do you know, Jim?
I don't know. I was reading a little bit about it, but I didn't really see where it originated. I was kind of looking at kind of what was taken and what they had done about it, but I did not see an origin.
So this hit the news in early August. when essentially citizens were getting alerted through their credit monitoring services. I mean, this is how I personally found out about it. And it seemed like within days of me getting my first alert, it was all over the news. It was all over the cybersecurity news, whether or not how broadly this went outside of people in the industry. I'm not sure. But so there's a somewhat well-known hacker, US DOD, who claimed that he was responsible for the breach. And he was trying to sell the data on the dark web, right? And
Not affiliated with the DoD.
no,
as far as we
not
know.
affiliate at all.
Well,
Right.
maybe.
As far as we know.
It's clever.
Yeah. So maybe that's his esteemed target that he tries to hack into. But who knows? He was trying to sell the data for $3.5 million. And from what I can ascertain, no one was buying it.
Yeah, well, as bad as the data are, I wouldn't buy it either.
Yeah, so he didn't talk about or disclose how he breached NPD, but he made a note that there's, he's got data, 2.9 billion records. So the headlines were very sensationalized, right? And every American data is disclosed, and by the numbers, it seems, well, that's probably reasonable. If you got 2.9 billion records, there's only 350 million at the high end, maybe U.S. citizens. But when you dug into the data, there was, the numbers were because there were multiple records on people, and there was a lot of incomplete data.
Yeah, and one of the articles said that there was it looked like there was an attempt to dedupe the data, but there was also people found quite a few duplicated socials and birth dates. So
yeah, just like any large database, right? You're gonna have people entering data, and they fat finger it, and rather than taking their 30 seconds to fix it, they just start a new entry.
Yeah.
Right. We see this a lot in healthcare with patient records, right? You do a search for a patient record in an EMR, and you find the wrong one, or you start editing on one and you realize it's the wrong. Well, it's easier to just ask for forgiveness and
right. Well, in some of when we were poking around before, for my parents, I noticed some of the addresses were like a number off. So it wasn't, and you could tell somebody probably just fat fingered it and kept moving, or, who knows if they're scrubbing this data, whoever they scrubbed it from may have had it wrong. So their system didn't recognize that it was a duplicate.
Sure. And if you buy a bunch of public record and you're scanning and doing OCR.
Yeah. One spelling mistake and you have a new field. So.
Yep, exactly. But he never disclosed how he broke in. So whether this was a classic phishing attack, which a lot of organizations get breached that way, was this data on a cloud platform that was just improperly secured and they stumbled across it? Was it an info stealer, which is a common attack these days where they disclose credentials? I don't know that we'll ever find out, at least until they do some major investigation.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I was reading on it too said because the data was a little sketchy to begin with, there's not a whole lot of use to any particular piece, but they are using that then to further attack. So there might not be enough to just use it and run with it. So they're using it then for targeted phishing attacks or targeted, communication. So that you think they know more about you and then you divulge more. So I thought that was kind of an interesting take on it too.
To me, there have been a lot more, a lot of attacks this year that I'm more concerned about than this one. The one where someone was spoofing the toll authority or one of the toll authority contractors from Florida and was grabbing live or relatively live tolling data and texting people. That one was pretty scary.
Keep going. So what was going? I haven't.
Well, I don't have all of the information, but so the Florida Attorney General keeps trying to knock down spoofed sites for one of the vendors to the toll roads in several southern states. But the malicious actor, for example, I went out to the East Coast and I had to use plenty of open road tolling. And when I got where I was going, So if I was traveling on a Thursday, let's say, and I got there on a Friday, on that Saturday morning, I got a text that said, "Hey, you missed a toll. Click this link and pay your fee." And it looked
so
pretty,
they knew. So so they knew you were traveling, and that's where the real time part came into play. That then they could target, and you go, "Hey, maybe I did miss it, or maybe it didn't scan it, or maybe
I absolutely clicked it." What turned me on to the fact that it might be fraudulent was that they asked for my entire social security number,
which is scary that they, they probably tapped into the credit or the license plate readers, but how do they correlate your SMS text number, right?
Well, my suspicion on that one, and I know we're getting away from our topic here, so I apologize, but on that one, my suspicion is that the toll authorities need to share information with each other, and they're probably sharing it with somebody that they don't know is malicious. I can't think of another way.
Or the middle service is compromised, right?
Right.
So,
I mean, because it seems unlikely that they would have access to tolling devices per se. Maybe not.
But if you had set up, I know SunPass is a big one in Florida. Like if you had set up your SunPass, then that may be tied to a phone number associated with the credit card. So that's how they're getting that secondary. Yeah. It might not be tied to your license plate, but when it's processing, that's where they're grabbing.
And I'm going to say the only people that I can think of that had the information they used to get me to click the link was the Indiana Toll Highway Authority.
Interesting.
Or their vendor.
Because of your account.
Because of my account.
Right.
Yeah. So this is not really a distraction or diversion of the topic, because once your data is out there and it's harvested and shared for, you see these privacy practices that, we're only going to share with our affiliates and our business partners. Well, that could be such a wide swath of organizations. And when you think about third-party risk management, how are those affiliates and business partners securing the data once they have it in their systems? And then they're sharing it with their affiliates and their business partners. So you're right. Something that you do in Northern Illinois, Northwest Indiana could impact activity that happens in Florida. So data brokers, they're not necessarily regulated, right? So there's millions of Americans that have had their data breached, and I haven't received a letter yet. Have you received a letter, Joe?
I have not.
But on the data broker thing, though, like at what point is the cat out of the bag? Because once your data's out there once, then who cares about the second time? It's already floating around out there somewhere.
Well, and I think that's why this, although for a couple of weeks after this went public, there was lots of, particularly industry headlines that were very in your face. That's all I saw. Twitter, LinkedIn, all of the news feeds that I subscribe to. And it's the same message, right? 2.9 billion records. No one really got to the meat of the issue of, right? This is bad, right? I don't want to downplay it. It's certainly bad. It's probably one of the largest.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's one of the largest individual breaches from the impact of citizens, right?
Yeah.
So I think 272 unique SSNs, right? So
272 million.
272 million.
Not too long ago, that was the population.
That was the population,
States,
right?
Like in recent memory.
And if the data is dated 20 years old,
right?
We haven't grown that much in 20 years, but it's a lot of people.
Yeah.
But to your point, when this broke, my first thought was, well, okay, so I was in the Office of Personnel Management breach in was that 15?
Yep, that was a big one.
The Anthem one. I mean, and in fact,
the Equifax breach.
Yeah,
all of us was in that.
Yeah. And in fact, so the time I spent at HHS, I was privy to a conversation between the Social Security Administration Council and HHS's counsel, and they, the SSA guy says, well, stop using Social Security number. And the HHS guy says, well, why bother? You should create a different identifier, because everybody's Social Security number is already everywhere.
And that's the thing. Like if my email is compromised, I change my password. If my social's compromised, I just keep the same one and keep rolling.
And
with it.
sometimes
So it's
you might
once
even
it's out
go
there,
to a different email account.
Right.
Well,
but I can't change, I can't change my address. I can't change, but and you can, but it's still all correlated and cross tabulated, I guess would be the term for it. So it's like, once it's out there once and associated with my name, maybe next time it's not associated with my name. So there's still that, like, somebody would have to pair it up.
Well,
but it's out there.
So some of these breaches have gotten me thinking, because I worry not only about my own information, but my kids too. And so for me, what I started to do was kind of implement those cybersecurity frameworks in my own life, right? The first thing you do, and you're probably already doing it, right, is think about what information is most critical, what your family needs, what you do that's critical to their well-being, and you start with those and you protect those as tightly as you can. I know my social security number is out there, so but you think critically about what information you're giving. Like if I go to a place like sporting goods store or wherever, and like, oh, do you want to join our club? And no, I'm not giving you this information. And usually if you push back, right, that's one thing. But even further than that, especially when the toll road thing really got me, when that happened, they always tell you to freeze your credit, which we had done. And unless you're having another big purchase, that's feasible. But I have very few accounts, credit accounts, any of that stuff. I don't keep any more than I can watch. And I just, that's, I live with my social security number being out there, but I plan for, if I watch and I find something, I plan for that to happen. And one of the things I could do, and you could do, right, we can all do, is that if it gets bad enough, you apply for a new social security number. You get 3 a year or 10 in your lifetime. So
3 a year, that seems excessive, but
I would assume
3 in a lifetime.
So it could be, right. 3 a year is excessive,
right?
In that if you exercise 3 in a year, it doesn't take you long to get to 10.
Does your debt go with it?
Well, unfortunately, but you could see, just like with what happens here with social security numbers, they've kind of become ubiquitous out in the environment. But you could see where, much like NPD, so they had this problem. They got a new social security number. Well, they never plugged the hole, or they thought they did and they didn't. And then you're in it for a second one. That kind of thing could go on for a while.
Citizens, we need to monitor our own situation, right? It's one thing to say that NPD got compromised and they've yet to send out a letter, but I was notified before things went public, right? Because monitoring services are in place. Right. So it seems like that my data has been breached so many times that I'll likely never have to pay for credit monitoring or dark web monitoring, because it seems like every time one
become a public service,
about it rolls off, another one happens.
I don't know. There's no credit monitoring offered with this breach. It's just
there's not, right? So how many breaches
you on your own?
How many breaches happen that you don't get letters and you don't get credit monitoring? But some other monitoring services alert you, right? And if you do banking at fairly large banks, I know JP Morgan Chase does this. Right. They'll monitor your stuff. They were one of the sources of the alerts I've got.
My Discover does. I don't know that it's like a full blown, but it monitors a little bit. Like I would get notifications.
But it is the high watermark, right? If it's something that is major,
Yep.
it's probably going to get popped up. Right?
Yep.
And you can at least intervene and take action.
Yeah. I had Experian, and it wasn't until this thing popped up that I was like, I probably better log into that and just kind of, I don't ever look at it. And I did. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't, too long after that, we applied for a vehicle loan, and I got the notification because I had, kind of reactivated my Experian, and I was like, hey, that's probably a good thing to have because it was instant. I mean, it was within seconds. So, yeah.
Well, there was a point in time when I was when we were traveling when I froze all of my accounts. And when we would stop and get like Jimmy John's or something like that, I would have to reactivate it and take the transaction, then shut it down again. I mean, that's
that real time? When you lock it down that hard?
Yeah, but that's one of the things you can do that if you really think you're in danger, that's something you can do.
With mobile banking and the apps and connectivity being pervasive, that is absolutely something you could do, right? If you're at a risk level where you know that you've had a number of fraudulent transactions and someone is, looking to cause you harm. We've had just in our household, my wife's Groupon account was compromised.
Oh yeah.
And she had her PayPal linked to Groupon, and PayPal had, get this, an expired credit card. But
they'll go through sometimes.
Yeah, PayPal has relationships with the big merchants and the big card brands that when your card expires, but the number doesn't change, right? The CVV changes, but and the expiration date changes, PayPal gets updated automatically. So, her credit monitoring, popped up that she had like 3,000 dollars of transactions. Do you recognize these? No. So yeah, but if she had frozen those cards or whatever when they were inactive, even if the data was breached, it would have been, a nonsense or a non-issue.
I did replace my credit cards, the ones that I use. I don't have that many, so it wasn't that. But I did that, absolutely.
But there might be new data as part of this incident that wasn't out there before, right? Could be really old addresses, which might help build a larger
complete
dossier.
Complete somebody's puzzle. Yep.
Or they would have information on maybe relatives, right? So if you start to parse and correlate the data, right? You lived with your parents for at least the
5
first
years.
18 years of your life.
35 years.
Right. So
they kicked me out.
They can start to figure out, okay, James is related to, Mrs. Stratton.
Right.
And
well, that already happens. I mean, my dad has never lived at our address and we still get his mail, and he died 4 years ago. Like how they put that together is crazy. But then, they also apparently don't know that he's dead. So there's this weird disconnect, but also a very strong connect.
Sure. And with the 23andMe breach and Ancestry.com being breached, all these different data, it's out there.
Boy.
Right.
It would take someone with not even a really big plan to kind of put all that together.
Yep.
And with big data analytics today, it would not take, we could probably become a data broker over a weekend with just harvesting data that's out there.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
So yes, this is a big deal. I think our listeners who will be keen on this subject because they're listening to a cybersecurity podcast, but just know that your family members, your neighbors may need your help.
Right.
So,
well, I mean, just in that little bit of research we were doing before the show, I'm sure as heck gonna call my mom. It's, I know she's pretty keen on that stuff too, naturally, which is, good. But I'm just gonna give her a heads up because I know she knows about this whole thing, but she didn't know about the resource to go look to see if she was involved. So, at least just to let her know. I know she already monitors all that stuff. So, just that little heads up.
Well, and the senior citizens of our lives they're typically more vulnerable with AI, right? If they could learn something from this breach and use AI to, they're listening to this podcast, they mimic your voice, they call your mom.
Yep.
Hi mom, this is Jim. I'm in a bind. Lost my wallet. Can you wire me some funds?
Yep.
And if it sounds like you, and they can paint a picture that they know a lot more about you than they should, it's scary.
Yep.
So I think we should all be on the lookout for, an uptick in social engineering attacks, very much like that SMS message you got from the toll roads. Unrelated to this,
which was,
probably.
Not related to this, to be clear.
But
still, just there are a lot of echoes between the two. Also,
And I'm definitely interested in your guys' opinion on privacy law. What should be the rules for a data broker, right? Should you as a U.S. citizen have the ability to opt out and the right to be forgotten and purge and
right? But once it's out there, it's out there. Like if it exists now, maybe I could shut it down for my kids, but like even if they put in rules now, some of my information is still floating. So it wouldn't, I don't think, affect me, but it could affect kids that aren't at that level, that their stuff isn't out there at all. They don't exist online.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah. So this must have been 10 years ago now, maybe, roughly. So I presented a paper in Europe that was privacy related. And we got into this discussion with some of the Europeans about, they were all proud of GDPR and, blah, blah, blah. Great, but enforce that, right? I mean, you don't have, those states aren't required. I mean, that's a hard thing to enforce among states with such a loose union. But I mean, you can imagine where something like that in the United States may work and may be beneficial, although I think it would be hard to, first of all, it's not in our consciousness here right now. We're focused on other things in the United States. But if it were to be, it would be hard to get that kind of legislation through, I would think.
We have a lot harder time passing simpler things. So
it seems to be.
You think it would be a nonpartisan issue to protect data, but data is currency, right? So
it's money, right? And I mean, you're for good or bad, right? If you put that regulation in place, it shuts some folks down. So yeah, it's a
maybe we just go from the penalty side, not the rule side. But again, I feel like it's tough to enforce, or would be tough to enforce, because then you have to decide if it was malicious intent or not, and then that's a completely different cat to skin. So
yeah. Yep.
Well, we're not going to solve all the world's problems right now, are we?
No. And this may be the biggest breach of this quarter, but it's almost Thanksgiving.
George needs some new credit monitoring.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to roll off soon.
Maybe somebody will beat them out next year, next quarter or something.
They seem to get bigger every time.
Yeah.
So,
but I guess that brings up another interesting perspective. I mean, it's obvious the trend, but you don't see, and maybe the defenses are getting better, but the attacks keep getting bigger. So it's like, is it what's chasing what? Is it pure defense, or is there some offense to try to prevent it? But I guess if you don't know what's coming, it's hard to prevent.
Well, I don't know that most of us are. I mean, if you think about it in terms of the stature of individuals and their exposure, I mean, nobody cares much about me and would I'm not.
That's not true.
Thanks. I mean, I'm not in Congress or I'm not a big public official. I'm not a high profile.
You're not a politician. You're not a journalist. You're not an activist. Get it.
So for me, what works is I know some stuff and I pay attention, but it's like everything else. So many things demand your attention these days that it becomes impossible to do all of the things that you're expected to do as best practice as an individual to, live your optimal life or do the things you're supposed to do. I mean, one of the reasons that that toll road breach got me so riled up and nervous was that, I clicked the link and I got pretty far into the process before it caught my attention.
Right. And if they wouldn't have asked for SOCH, your spidey sense definitely would not have gone off, because you wouldn't have expected an attack to be that
context was perfect. The timing,
the timing was amazing.
Right.
And it wasn't even, I sat there for a second and I thought, it's conceivable that the Toll Highway Authority has this as a means for verification.
Right.
Because, people say, oh, we never ask you for. there is no never.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we've all had experiences with the feds where they've asked for full socials and asked you to send it to them in unencrypted form. And you have to tell them, no, I'm not doing that, but so that's conceivable. And, but the reason that it caught me so off guard is because I was, here I am, I'm in the middle of a city on a Friday or whatever day it was. And I've got my kids and other kids and, I'm not paying attention
as much. Were there any tips in like in the actual link itself, or was it just the social that tipped you off?
That was it.
Wow.
Everything else looked really good.
Wow. And if they wouldn't have asked that much, it probably would have worked. That's the crazy thing.
Yeah.
Because like you said, if you're, especially if you're on a toll road, you're usually traveling for business or pleasure or something, and so your brain in that moment, if it would have happened a week later, even, you would have been like, well, I don't know. I think everything hit my card or hit my pass or whatever. But in the moment,
right,
while you're doing whatever you're going to do,
and look back at what tolls I hit. And in fact, a week later, I don't remember which state it was, but one of the states did contact me and said, boy, are you are so deficient in your funds on this. You're going to have to pay these tolls.
Right.
And that was absolutely legit. And I had a chance to sit at my computer and go figure it out.
Yep.
But not right then.
Right.
And
when you're in the heat of a vacation or work or whatever else, it's really easy just to, and I wonder how many people they actually got with that.
Well, and they were even good with the amount. I mean, the amount was like $4.
Right.
Well, I mean, if it's $70 or even $25, you might think, well, hold on a second.
Right.
But $4, you're like, $4. Ding, 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 ding.
Yep.
Right.
And however many thousands of people travel that particular road every day, that's.
It was pretty well done.
Yeah.
I was impressed.
So, what organizations can do, I think, Jim, is data retention practices. Right. So earlier in the year, T-Mobile was compromised. Right. And I haven't been a T-Mobile customer for 25 years. I got a letter. I got free credit monitoring because they disclosed my SSN and call records. And I'm like, what's the benefit of retaining, a cellular customer's data that he was a customer for maybe a year and a half?
Yeah.
That's 25 years old.
Because if they want it, they don't have to buy it then. Or they're already selling it.
They're already selling it.
Right.
Yep.
Space is cheap.
Yep.
Another couple megabytes of data.
Yeah. And how many people have we talked to in assessment? Oh, we absolutely have minimum timelines because we save everything all the time.
Yeah. It's cheaper to just store it than it is to figure out what to keep and what to get rid of.
Right.
But if we thought about privacy and intentionally kept data that was important to our business and purged data that was no longer valuable or increased, not necessarily liability to the company, but made the customer more vulnerable.
Yep. Well, and one of my good friends growing up, his dad was a physician. And back then it was 7 year. I think it was 7 years on paper.
Still is
records.
7 years unless you're pediatrics, and it's 18 plus 7.
Yeah. And so every year there was a bonfire with all of the 7 year, whatever was due, but with digital, it's harder to have that verification that it really is gone, Yeah. But I think the retention is an interesting perspective, because then if there's a breach, so let's say T-Mobile like you had, and you can say, well, that was well beyond the 7 years. Then there's that violation of some sort of regulation or policy that why did you still have it if I haven't been a customer for 7 years?
If you claim that you're going to purge every 7 to 10 years. And
right.
Yeah. Why does T-Mobile still have data on George that is older than Jim is?
And it wasn't even my
Why
phone.
Is that?
Yeah.
All right. Good talk. I don't think that data brokers aren't going away anytime soon. As you say, there's a market for data. Organizations do need to do some sort of data verification. So I just personally think they need a little bit more either industry regulation, self-regulation, self-policing. We saw this with the credit card industry, where after the major breach in early 2000s, when PCI started becoming about, they self-regulated. They didn't want the government coming down and telling them how to protect credit card information, so they did it themselves. And maybe we need some sort of advocate like that for data brokers.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. There are only a few of those folks, though.
Yeah. But they've got data on everybody.
They have everybody's data on everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So before we completely stop this, I wanted to throw out again the mpdbreach.com and the mpd.pentester.com. If you want to go check that out and see if your data may have been affected, and then take appropriate steps from there. So.
And then you can also look at Have I Been Pwned?
Yeah.
Troy Hunt maintains that website. What he did was he looked at the data to figure out how many unique email addresses there were. So it doesn't mean that your SSN was disclosed, but your data associated with your email might be in some subset of that data.
Yeah, and he was a guest on the podcast years ago. So I don't know what episode, but if you dig through our archive, you'll find it. But it was a fascinating conversation, and some of the gray area of what he does, and yeah.
So you'll be listening to us in October. So keep in mind, October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. CyberTAP will be running a social campaign on Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram. So if you're looking for messaging to share with your family and your employees, organization, certainly you can look at us. We'll have some messaging out there. We're going to be following along with the National Cybersecurity Alliance and their campaign. So some of the messaging will be similar. It's common themes, right? Phishing, MFA, strong passwords, and update your software. So the messaging is going to be very consistent that you've seen in previous years, but those are the most foundational cyber hygiene things that you can do. So look for that messaging. And of course, you can always reach us at
the cyberTAP podcast at purdue.edu.
We'd love to see your messaging.
Yep. Joe, any closing comments, advice,
I was
dad advice?
Just impressed at George's closing until you fumbled it.
I dropped it big time there.
No, just be vigilant and keep an eye on your own data. That's one of the best things you can do.
Cool. Thanks, Joe.
Until next time.